Taking lumber from rough sawn to flat and ready for joinery with hand planes can be a very satisfying experience when it works well. However, it can also be a very frustrating experience when it doesn't. A sharp, well-tuned hand plane certainly makes the work more enjoyable, but a well-tuned plane won't make boards flat all by itself. In order to judge the condition of the board that we're trying to make flat, we need an accurate reference to compare to. A pair of winding sticks are the ideal companion to the hand plane for this task. Winding sticks can be used as a straight edge to check a board for cup across its width or for bow along its length. By using them in a pair and sighting across their top edges, they can be used to identify twist or wind in the board. You can purchase winding sticks made of metal, plastic, or wood, but they're so easy to make yourself, there's really no reason to spend up to $200 on a pair. Making them yourself will also give you great practice with your hand plane. But before we make our winding sticks, let's take a second to talk about material choices. If you do enough research on winding sticks on the internet, you'll be inundated with material choices. You'll eventually conclude, as we all do, that the only material with acceptable stability for making winding sticks is Antarctic unobtainium mined during the first week of January at midnight during a waxing gibbous moon. Do your best to source this specific isotope of unobtainium, but if you can't, just use whatever wood you have. Softwoods are fine, hardwoods are fine, quarter sawn boards are fine, flat sawn boards are fine. If you can't find the unobtainium, it's really not that important. In fact, if you can't find the unobtainium, the two sticks don't even need to be made of the same wood or be the same size. Really, any two sticks will work. The only critical aspect of winding sticks is that the top edge and bottom edge are both straight and perfectly parallel. As long as these two edges are straight and perfectly parallel to each other, the winding sticks will do what they're supposed to do. I'm going to use this piece of cherry for my winding sticks because, well, I'm out of Antarctic unobtainium and I found this in the barn. But you should use whatever you have or whatever you can get. So I'll pick a relatively clear section of the board without any knots, and I'll cross cut it to 24 inches. Now this makes a good length for winding sticks, but if you can only get 18 inches or 20 inches, that's just fine too. Now after cross cutting the board, I'm going to hand plane the face a little bit to clean it up, paying attention to the grain direction as I do so. Now the condition of the face of the board isn't critical at this point. Really, I'm just cleaning it up so that I can have an easier time seeing my layout marks. And after cleaning up the face, I'll hand plane the adjacent edge relatively straight and square. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect at this point. I'm really just cleaning it up to make seeing my layout marks easier. With the faces and the adjacent edge cleaned up, it's time to make a decision. Do you want regular old rectangular winding sticks, or would you like to put a little bit of taper in them? The process is going to be the same regardless of which style you choose when you're using a thicker board like this. This board is almost 1.5 inches thick. What's going to differ is the layout. The winding sticks that I've been using for the past 10 years are tapered in their thickness, and I like that design, so that's what I'm going to do with these as well. So to facilitate that layout, I have a marking gauge set with two different settings. The wider one is set for 5/8 of an inch, the narrower one is set for 5/16 of an inch. Now I'll use the gauge to scribe a line 5/8 of an inch from the edge on this face and 5/16 from the edge on this face. And by connecting those two lines across the end grain we have our taper. Now, if you've watched my handsaw foundations course, you shouldn't be intimidated by an angled saw cut. As my friend Shannon Rogers is fond of saying, 90 degrees is an angle too. Once you understand the mechanics, using a handsaw is nothing more than tracking a line. So if you can lay out the line, you just saw to the line regardless of the angle. Review the sawing mechanics video in my handsaw foundations course. Line your body up with the cut line and focus on tracking the line, regardless of whether the cut line is at 90 degrees to the face of the board or some other angle. The mechanics are exactly the same. And after ripping the first stick free from the board, I'll clean up the sawn edge with the hand plane. And I'm not trying to plane the edge square. I'm simply following the angle of the saw cut. And I can lay out the rip cut for the second stick by scribing 5/8 of an inch from the long corner and 5/16 of an inch from the short corner. Then I'll rip this out just like the first one. And with the two sticks ripped free, I'll use the hand plane to clean up the sawn faces. So a quick aside about stock thickness. The cherry board that I used is about 1.5 inches thick. So to get my two winding sticks, I ripped strips off the edge that were about 5/8 of an inch thick, and they end up about 1.5 inches wide as the board is thick. If you don't have a thick board like this though, that's just fine. You can use a thinner board like this and just rip pieces off the board that are about 1.5 inches or so wide. Now they won't be tapered like mine, but that's really not important. The taper is more or less just aesthetic. So at this point we have a pair of winding sticks, but they're not ready for use yet. As I mentioned earlier, the critical requirement for these sticks is that the two edges are perfectly straight and parallel. So the next thing we need to do is make sure that these edges are perfectly straight and parallel. Starting with the bottom edge, we want to check that the edge is straight. We can do this by taking the stick and drawing a line. And then we want to turn the stick around and show that same edge to the line. If the edge is straight, the stick will align perfectly with the drawn line when we flip it over and show it to the other side of the line. However, if the stick isn't straight, any deviation from straight will be doubled. Now here you can see that we're on the line in the center, but the stick is slightly off the line at the two ends. It's not off by a lot, but it is off, and that tells me that we're high in the center. To adjust the edge, I'm going to set my plane for a very light cut. If the edge is high in the middle like mine, I'm going to start by just planing in the middle. And I'm going to plane just maybe the middle 6 inches or so until the plane stops cutting. Once the plane stops cutting, I'm going to extend my planing stroke and plane maybe the center foot. And I'm going to do this until the plane stops cutting again. Then I'm going to extend a little bit more until I'm starting in maybe 2 inches from either end. And I'm going to continue this way again until the plane stops cutting. And finally, tapered, so it doesn't want to hold very well in the vise. But I'm just going to plane in from the edge, maybe an inch from either side. And repeat one more time until the plane stops cutting. So I'm starting in from this edge and I'm stopping short of that edge. And my goal here is that I'm trying to create a hollow in the middle now. So now when I draw a line, what you'll see is that we have a hollow. So when I show my stick to the line, now there's a gap in the middle. This is actually easier to take out, and that's why we created it. To remove the hollow, we can plane end to end. And a little tip, tapered pieces are sometimes difficult to hold in the bench vise, so if you make yourself a little bird's mouth fixture, it makes it a little easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to plane end to end. And at first, you're going to get a broken shaving. Shaving at the beginning, shaving at the end. That's because we're taking that end down. And that's exactly what we want. We want to take the two ends down until they're even. And we're going to continue planing like this until we no longer get two separate shavings from each end. We want to plane until we get one long continuous shaving from end to end. As soon as we get that single long continuous shaving from end to end, we're going to stop planing. So after planing end to end and getting one long continuous shaving, I stopped planing, and now we have a stick that, when shown to the line, lines up perfectly with no gaps in the middle, no gaps on the ends. So our stick is perfectly straight. If after taking a full-length shaving and checking the bottom edge, you're still a little off and not perfectly straight, you may have to take one or two more shavings. So take one shaving at a time and then check again until that bottom edge is straight. Once your bottom edge is dead straight, then we need to make the top edges perfectly parallel to the bottom edge. Set a marking gauge to a hair narrower than the narrowest width that you find along your winding stick. Then scribe that onto your stick. This is going to give you a line that is perfectly parallel to the bottom edge of the stick. With your plane set for a very fine cut, plane the top edge down to your marking gauge line. Now, pay very close attention to that marking gauge line and only plane where necessary to get down to the gauge line. You may find that you have to plane certain areas more than others. So don't feel like you have to plane end to end every single time. Watch your gauge line and only plane where material needs to be taken away to get down to that gauge line. You want to plane just until your marking gauge line disappears. And as you're planing, you might see little slivers of wood like this peel up from the edge or fall off onto the workbench. These are an indication that you've hit your gauge line and you should stop planing. After gauging and planing the top edges of your sticks, you'll have a pair of winding sticks that can be used as a reference for checking flat and straight. Keep them safe because we're going to use them later. Also, recheck your sticks occasionally, and if necessary, replane them straight and parallel. If you take care of them and maintain your winding sticks, they should last you the rest of your woodworking days.